Welcome to Advocate Today. I'm Aaron Dean. A Georgia teacher fired for reading a book about gender identity to her fifth grade class is trying to get her job back. Katie Rendero read the book My Shadow is Purple to her class back in March. The book deals with gender fluidity. Cobb County school officials fired her after parents complained. They said that she broke the district's policy on teaching controversial subjects. She says that the book carries a broader message for gifted students that they should be able to explore all of their interests. Her lawyer called the termination political and that the district's definition of controversial topics is too vague. A panel of 3 retired teachers will now decide if she can get her job back, but the case could wind up in court. Florida students are returning to class with a new policy that will require parental permission to use nicknames in school. The new policy is the result of a recent law passed that targets queer youth who might prefer a different name altogether. Teachers and faculty are prohibited from using a student's preferred name unless their parent or guardian signs on. And even if a student was able to get permission from parents, according to another law, teachers wouldn't be required to use that student's preferred pronouns. Florida's Education Commissioner recently skipped out on an invitation to a community discussion about Black History standards in Miami Gardens. Miami Gardens is a predominantly Black area of South Florida. The meeting was organized at the Antioch Baptist Church, one of the largest churches in the city. City Commissioner Manny Diaz Jr. was a no-show. Over 1,000 people signed up to attend. Many criticized the new standards when they were announced last month, including Vice President Harris. The new standards require middle school teachers to instruct students that enslaved people develop skills of personal benefit. Now to the immigration crisis at the border. The federal government is suing the state of Texas over its efforts to prevent illegal immigrants from using a river to cross the border. The state deployed big round floating buoys. Meanwhile, those migrants are still being bused and flown to other cities, including New York City. Immigration Equality's executive director shares how we as a nation can do better in supporting migrants seeking a better life. We're seeing a tactic being used at the border in Texas by Governor Abbott, where barriers of buoys along the river are being used. And recently, a migrant was found dead on one of those. Can you kind of share with our viewers why this was implemented and what's really going on down there?
Sure, Aaron. Governor Abbott started this program called Lone Star, which really was a sort of political move, I think, in March of 2021, when a lot of the governors of the world were really putting their effort into taking care of their people during the COVID crisis. He really took that opportunity to get political hay out of looking like he was tough on the border, and invested a lot of people in Texas employees and Texas state troopers to take the place of the federal government in so-called policing the border. But they weren't there to help people; they were there to hurt people. And some of the stories that we heard from a whistleblower that the governor allowed are just horrific. As you said, they put gigantic buoys in the river, barrels that they covered with razor wire all along the river to force people into unsafe crossings. And even the whistleblower noted that those troopers then were told to push women and children and families back into the river if they made it to Texas, to discourage them from coming to the United States to ask for our assistance. The whistleblower also noted that they were told not to give the children water, even though there was 100-degree weather. One little girl who was 4 passed out because of that. Another woman who was caught in the razor wire miscarried in the middle of the river because she couldn't get to safety. And as you mentioned, people have drowned. Even last week, they found a young 20-year-old man attached to the razor wire who had been killed because of these measures.
And as you know, there are always short-term and long-term impacts of the things that happen. With all that Governor Abbott is doing in terms of, immigration policies, what are those impacts looking like as of right now?
Well, it makes it much harder for refugees to find safety in the United States. And I think one of the things I really think it's important for your viewers to know is that you have a legal right to apply for asylum. If you fear persecution or torture from your country and you come to the U.S. border, it doesn't matter how you cross the border. Congress has issued laws that have been on the books for years to say that you have a legal right to have that case heard. And for LGBTQ people, this is an essential life-saving mechanism. Immigration Equality has clients from all over Central and South America who are looking to the United States for a place to be their authentic selves and not to fear harm based on sexual orientation or gender identity. And the moves like the Texas governor and even President Biden to push people away and to restrict asylum cost LGBTQ people their lives.
And, before we kind of switch gears a little bit, is there any update on that suit filed against Texas regarding the buoys? Do you have any information on that?
Well, I think it's really heartening, and we embrace the DOJ's decision to sue about literally brutalizing refugees at the border. I mean, not only does Texas have no business doing that, it's illegal to do it. You can't hurt people in this way, not as a deterrent and not for any other reason. And it makes me wonder how much better the system would work if Governor Abbott actually spent money instead of pushing 10,000 Border Patrol or national troopers to the border to hurt people. What if they spent their time helping refugees? But I would say this is one really horrible problem in a much bigger system that is broken. And I think while we embrace the DOJ's lawsuit, I think it's telling that President Biden hasn't condemned these practices altogether. And on a bigger macro picture, Biden has a lot of his own policies to reform, including an absolute ban on people seeking asylum in the United States if they came through another country coming to the US, unless they were invited here by an electronic app on a smartphone. And so the way that this works out is that you have to download a CBP, the Border Patrol One app, and then you get in a lottery. And if you get lucky and you speak the languages in the app and you have access to the internet, there are all of these barriers for people who are refugees that they can't use. Maybe you get an interview with a Border Patrol officer and then are allowed to seek asylum. But one, that really hurts the most vulnerable among us, because a lot of LGBTQ people don't have access to that kind of quick, reliable technology. And they can't just wait around in Mexico or Central America for their number to be called, even if they do. Because every day that they're in a country that's unsafe means that they're one step closer to a terrible situation where, and again, and I keep reiterating this, they have a right to seek asylum in the United States, no matter how they get here. They'd have to be invited. That's all wrong. It's illegal. A district court judge in California has struck down this rule, and it's pending appeal now.
And before we had started, the interview, you had mentioned there's a big, all eyes are on Texas right now because that's where the news is there. It's what everyone's talking about. But there has to be a bigger issue of across the board that needs to be addressed. Am I right? Because it can't just be just Texas.
Well, Texas has a huge part to play here because they border so much of the southern border. But I think with Texas and with the federal government, the United States spends so much more money on so-called enforcement mechanisms when what we have an obligation to do, not just because the law requires it, but because we're trying to set a standard for how the world should treat refugees. Instead of spending billions of dollars on enforcement and billions of dollars on detention facilities where people are abused and horribly mistreated, especially LGBTQ people, we should divert all of that money in ensuring that our immigration courts are properly staffed, ensuring that people have a fair trial and have access to due process and to attorneys to help them with their due process, and really welcoming people with dignity in a way that has been a lot of our history. But most recently, and starting certainly with the Trump administration and going into the Biden administration, we've shifted that. And I think in order to preserve our place in this, if we have any respectability in the world on human rights, we got to change the system.
Thanks for watching Advocate Today. Download the app in the Apple or Google Play Store to stream us live, and you can even subscribe on our YouTube channel. For the Advocate channel, I'm Aaron Dean.